All right, welcome to our Job Seeker Stand-Up. Thank you everybody for joining. Today we're going to be continuing on helping you guys prepare for the interview. As I was saying earlier, that last week we spent some time on preparing for proposals for freelance jobs at BA. But this week we're going back into the traditional job hunt, and we're going to be talking about interview questions. And as I've been telling you before, we've done several of these sessions in our stand-up where we talk about the types of questions you're going to get, how best to tell stories, what kind of questions to anticipate. But there's so much, right? There's so much that the interview can entail. There's so many directions it can go depending on your industry, depending on what type of job you're going up for, depending on the interviewer. So there's so much. So we can't really exhaust it. So sometimes during our stand-ups on Thursdays, like we are doing today, we will spend some time just diving deeper into how to answer these interview questions. And I really want to focus on difficult questions that you would say, oh my God, that's not easy at all. I want to focus on those because those are the ones that will really can trip you up in the interview and can cause you to stumble. And if you have like good knowledge of your domain, so let's say you're in insurance and you really understand insurance and how to do work in insurance, but you don't know how to be a BA for an insurance company. These are the kinds of questions that can get you tripped up. So if they focus on just how you handle claims or how you handle insurance policies, you know that. But how do you talk about it from the perspective of a BA? So if you're trying to transition, this is where people get stuck. So I'm going to go through some questions that I have picked out. So you guys who are on Slack, you saw that I posted some of the questions. It wasn't enough time for you to really soak it in, but I have the questions on Slack. So I'm going to go through some of these more difficult business analyst interview questions and how to answer them and what are they really asking. So I'll give you some examples from my work experience, from my domain. But as you go into the world and you're looking for jobs, you're going to kind of follow the pattern to see what is the core of what they're really asking me in this question, and what can I draw from my own experience, some of the things I've been working on, whether it's a BA job or not, whatever you've been doing, can you pull an example like that can help them to see the characteristics and the qualities that they're looking for, right? So we're going to get into that in this session. If you have any questions, you can always ask me as usual, but I'll try to go through it and leave some time at the end, hopefully to help you guys to have some time to ask questions, right? Let me share my screen. Okay, so preparing for the interview, we're going to jump straight in. We're not going to spend any time because I need to get to the story. So when you're going up for a functional BA role, obviously it can be quite challenging because, again, a lot of you have worked in the field, so it's difficult to kind of convince somebody to give you the job when you haven't actually been doing that. It's hard to break in. I don't deny that, but they're testing for your ability to bridge the gap as a BA. They're testing for your technical knowledge and how you work with technical teams. They're testing for your ability to work in ambiguity where you don't have all the answers. A lot of us like to think about, well, how am I going to do this? So you don't need to know how as a BA. It's like what do you need to do, right? And how you can communicate and collaborate with stakeholders. So those are some of the things that they're typically testing for in the questions that they ask you. So here are some more difficult questions that I posted in our Slack that we're going to go through today. So number one, if you're in an interview and they ask you this, what would you say, right? How do you handle conflicting requirements from different stakeholders? It's a spin-off of the question, how do you handle difficult stakeholders, right? So they'll ask that question in different ways, but what they're really asking, so I want you to start developing the muscle of quickly, because you have to think on your feet, right? This is something that over time you get it, but you're going to have to find some shortcut to do it faster, because in the interview, you don't have a lot of time to think, so you kind of have to practice ahead of time, and when you're in that interview, hopefully you'll be able to pull it off, right? You have to think, what do they really want to know? So in this question, what they're trying to get to from you is, how are you managing your stakeholders? What is your approach to stakeholder management, and how do you handle conflicts? What is your conflict resolution approach? Because sure enough, you are going to be in projects where the different stakeholders are telling you different things. Like, I like to think that I'm in one of the best environments ever because I work with, high level professionals who are much smarter than me, some of them, and I learn from them, and I'm so happy with the people I work with. But even them, some person is going to tell you we should do it this way, and the other one say no, we should do it that way, and then you have to pull out the requirements. How do you get these people on different pages to come to an alignment? It's very difficult. So that's a part of your skill. That's why they pay you all the money they pay you. So how do you handle conflict is a question, and this is a good way to frame it. So in your answering of this, you have to give a story. Obviously, we talked about how to tell stories and, the STAR method: situation, task, actions that you take, actions they take, results. And in my case, I like to call it STARS because I have a conclusion that you should draw. But in any story that you tell about this, you need to mention how you prioritize. So prioritization is one of the great ways that you can help stakeholders to get aligned. Obviously, having communication and collaboration with your stakeholders, obviously letting them see that they are heard and taking away action items, obviously trying to meet with everybody who's involved together and not going off in silo. Meet with this one, they tell you something, meet with that one, they tell you something different. You can do that at the beginning. But whenever you see there's conflict, now you got to pull everybody together, put them in a room together, present the problem, and then say, I know your opinion on this was such and such and such. The other person say, no, but I think if you do this, such and such and such. And in general, when we work for a company, most of the time, we just want the good of the outcome for the company. It's not, a lot of people, depending on the level of professionalism, they don't take it personal, right? So it's like, what's the best for the project? And if somebody sees that their idea could cause problem, they typically back down, right, eventually. So yes, you have a few egotistical people here and there, but in general, pulling people together and letting them see the light, shine the light on all the problems that exist is a great way to resolve the conflicts and change and help because sometimes the person who holds a strong opinion, they don't really understand the point of view of the other person. So by putting them together, having good stakeholder management means communicating with your stakeholders, being transparent with the stakeholders, and also helping them to see each person's side and coming to a consensus together. They may not agree, but they actually align, right? They at least say, okay, I think we should fix this, but maybe we'll fix it the next time. Maybe we'll do a phase 2 on this. And right now we just need to go to market with these things. Okay, let's do it that way, right? So in general, people want the best for the project, to keep their jobs, to feel like they've accomplished something. They'll concede, and that's how you deal with it. So in a question like this, you have to tell it through a story, right? So a good example would be, for example, I'm working on a project, and the project is to I like to use my banking application stories because that's my domain. Obviously, you can use your own domain. But we're working on a project, and these are all true stories. We're working on a project to build a loan application system. And this is one of them that I did for my Insightful. And a part of the project included us having to make several, we call it API calls, which is backend calls, to different systems to confirm whether or not the person who's applying for this loan is actually the person who they say they are. So if I'm a small business, I'm applying for a loan. Well, if you're really a small business, do you have an LLC? Right, we got to go check with the department, the government department, the state department to see if your LLC is registered. We have to go check that you've been in existence for a certain number of years, other things that we check. And part of our discussion was, when do we make that check? So one hand, the business wanted to make the check later on because they don't want to impede the process, because this is we call it the asynchronous check, which means you have to finish updating your information and then we go to the check. And it doesn't happen real time. So we have to wait, and then we send you an email and we get the response to say, go back into the application to complete it. So it's like there's a pause between when we can get the results, right? So the business doesn't want to have to pause because they feel like people might just feel fed up with the process, have to come back and fill in more forms, right? They want it to be as seamless and as straightforward as possible. The technical team, they actually want the pause because they feel like otherwise they're going to be storing a lot of information that's not going to be useful, and it helps them in the processing to process less things unless you're approved. Like if you don't have an LLC, you can't go forward the application. So we shouldn't even be processing that. So we feel like it's using up resources. The technical team feels like it's using up resources. It's going to cause junk data, and it's just not a technically feasible thing. But the business says, well, we don't want our customers to have to come in twice to fill out the form, because part of the application form happens before we make this check, and the other part happens after. So they want them to fill out everything they need to fill out, and then we go check. And if they don't meet, we just tell them, hey, we couldn't qualify, and that's it. But then you have to keep this, because of regulations, you got to keep the data, you got to do all the stuff and all this stuff. So they're at odds. They're at odds. You can't let them put in everything while at the same time waiting for results from the different calls that you have to do. So we had to meet, we had to discuss that. Everybody had their strong opinions. The business wants the best experience for the customer. The technical team wants the best usage of our resources and our processing time and all these other things, right? So we came together. We had a workshop where we thought about what would be a good medium between a good user experience and good technical design. And we ended up saying, okay, we will do one check first. And if that check passes, then we'll do the next check. And if that check, so we'll let them enter everything in, and then we'll do the check. So we kind of acquiesced to the business a little bit more than the technical team. But what the technical team could do was they would save this in a temporary place, that unless you moved on to the next step, then that data wouldn't be there. And we had to check with our legal department to see what of all this data do we have to keep for, if somebody says you were unfairly denied a loan, we have to prove that we didn't do that. Like what are the data sets that we need to keep? So we were able to work all the fine details out. And by having more discussion, more collaboration, and also to prioritize which of these things was most important to the company, it turned out that the business having a great user experience so they didn't have to come back and fill out more forms turned out to be the most important thing, which usually it is. And that's what kind of drove where we were. So the technical team tried to find ways that would not be too intrusive for what they're building and also meet the requirements for what the business wanted. So that's one example, a little bit technical, but that's one example of how you can kind of bring conflicting stakeholders together and try to help them to find a common ground. And most of the time, not just because the business wants it means it's the best thing. There are times when the business wants something and we say, no, we have to do it another way, because even though it's going to be great, the amount of people that's impacted is not as much, and the effort to create this is much greater and it's costing much more. So we're going to do something simpler. So it doesn't mean all the time that the business gets what they want, but a lot of times they do. But you want to show how there is a conflict. You want to show how you are instrumental in bringing that conflict to a good resolution. And you want to show how you help with prioritization, stakeholder management, and just in general facilitating good collaboration. That is what they're actually asking you for in this example. And if you can tell a story that kind of encapsulates that, and this doesn't have to be a BA related story, right? You always think that there is these questions are only for BA, people who have worked in BA. Stakeholders are stakeholders. Customers are stakeholders. Patients are stakeholders. Doctors are stakeholders. Managers are stakeholders. It could be any person who has a vested interest in the thing you're doing, that there's a conflict and you had to bring it together, right? So don't worry that you don't have real BA only experience. You can pull from other places to show how you're able to pull this together and help them to achieve a good result.